There are places on Earth that seem designed to hold silence. Antarctica is one of them, a continent so empty and so vast that even thought feels slower there, as if distance itself has weight. Long before the first research station was built, and long before satellites traced its white outline from orbit, it existed as a blank shape at the bottom of the world, a cold margin on early maps, a wide space where imagination drifted freely because nothing else could survive. Yet in that absolute stillness something appeared, something dark, something angular, something that should not exist in a landscape sculpted only by wind ice and time. When the first satellite images began circulating across forums and scientific databases, they showed an outline that made even skeptical minds pause. A sharp triangle rising from the snow, a shape so precise and so clean that people did not agree on what they were seeing. Some insisted it was a nunatak, a mountain peak cut by glacial erosion into a seemingly perfect form. Others stared longer at the grainy photographs and felt a small unsettling pressure in their chest. They were looking at a geometry that did not belong to the natural world, a geometry that mirrored something found in deserts, jungles, or ancient floodplains. A geometry older than recorded history. A pyramid. Before we step further into the unknown, share with me where you are listening from and what hour finds you. And remember, the visuals here are simply echoes to help you imagine the world we are exploring. Thank you for joining us and for supporting this unfolding journey. The idea should have been dismissed quickly. Antarctica should be the last place on Earth where a structure could stand for thousands of years. It is a place that destroys everything exposed to its cold. Stone breaks, metal corrodes. Anything human is erased almost immediately by storms that cut across the plateau with invisible blades. And yet there it was, a dark shape staring back through the ice with edges too deliberate for comfort. The scientific explanation came fast but sounded thin. Glaciers carve mountains all the time, they said. Freeze and thaw cycles can sharpen ridges into points. Light and shadow can create illusions. But there was a hesitation in those explanations, a slight tremor beneath the certainty, because even experts understood how rare it was for nature to create something that imitates intention so closely. People around the world reacted the same way. A brief moment of disbelief followed by a deeper, more private question. What if this shape is not an illusion? What if this is evidence of a chapter of human history we have not yet opened? A chapter buried under miles of ice long before our oldest stories began. No one wanted to jump to conclusions, but no one could ignore the unease either. Antarctica is not supposed to be a cradle of civilization. It is supposed to be untouched, uninhabitable, and unchanging. A place where cold preserves emptiness, not memory. So why does a place that should hide nothing show a shape that looks unmistakably designed? Why does a continent without ruins, without cities, without any trace of humanity, whisper with the outline of a monument? If the shape is natural, then the mystery ends quickly. If it is not, then history is incomplete. Entire timelines would shift. Origins would blur. Everything we thought we knew about the rise of humanity would need to be rewritten. That is the question that should not exist, and yet it lingers at the edge of every discussion surrounding the Black Pyramids of Antarctica. Hovering like a shadow across the ice, waiting for someone to look a little longer and ask the one thing no one is supposed to ask. What if the simple explanation is wrong? The mystery of Antarctica's Black Pyramids did not begin with explorers or excavations. It began with pixels. It began with a set of photographs captured from hundreds of miles above the surface of the Earth. Photographs that should have shown nothing more than white emptiness and the vague shapes of buried mountains. Photographs that instead revealed something far more troubling. The moment the images appeared online, they did not behave like ordinary satellite photographs. They did not fade quietly into scientific archives or remained tucked away in geological reports. They moved. They spread. And the more they spread, the more people stared at the same shapes and reached completely different conclusions. At the center of this debate are three triangular formations located along the Ellsworth Mountains. At first glance, they look like peaks, but the longer one studies them, the less comfortable that explanation becomes. Their sides appear smooth, their lines appear straight, their shadows fall in ways that suggest intentionality rather than chance. They stand alone against the vastness, as if they were placed, not formed. One of the images shows a structure with three visible faces, each rising to a point that seems almost too crisp for nature. Another displays a shape that looks like a near-perfect equilateral triangle. The third sits miles away, but aligns in a way that some claim resembles a pattern. Not a pattern created by accident, but a pattern one might associate with astronomical placement or symbolic geometry. Of course, the internet had no hesitation. The moment the images were posted, theories bloomed across forums and comment sections. Some viewers insisted that they were looking at evidence of a forgotten civilization. Others claimed the shapes were remnants of an age before the ice settled. A few suggested they were markers of something older than humanity itself, yet scientific voices entered the conversation with equal speed. Geologists explained that such shapes were not unusual. They pointed to the known process of glacial carving. They produced diagrams showing how intersecting valleys could form a pyramidal peak. They listed other mountains around the world with the same outline. They repeated the same phrase with patient insistence. Nature can create perfect geometry. But these explanations did not settle the issue. Instead, they raised new questions. How perfect can natural geometry become? And how often does it occur in a place so hostile that almost no human has ever stood there to confirm it? The problem was not only the shapes themselves. It was the difference between seeing them from above and understanding them from below. Every satellite image is a compromise. Angles distort, shadows exaggerate, depth becomes ambiguous. What looks sharp from space may be jagged from the ground. What looks symmetrical may be an illusion created by the way the light falls across the ice. But this ambiguity did not weaken the mystery. It strengthened it, because no one was stepping forward with a definitive answer. Scientists disagreed among themselves. Some argued that the formations were ordinary nunataks. Others admitted, reluctantly, that the structures appeared unusually crisp. A few even noted that the alignment of the formations was interesting. Not proof, but interesting. The debate soon spiraled into a confrontation between two worldviews. On one side stood those who trust the known processes of the Earth. They believe that geology explains everything, and that the burden of proof lies entirely with anyone making extraordinary claims. On the other side were those who believe that the past is far stranger than textbooks suggest. They argue that even science is limited by the assumptions it begins with. If we assume no ancient civilization existed in Antarctica, then we interpret every shape as natural by default. But what if that assumption is wrong? The tension between these perspectives became visible in every discussion about the images. A scientist might say the slopes appear too steep to be artificial. A theorist might respond that ancient cultures may have built structures we still cannot explain. A skeptic might claim the image resolution is too low for analysis. A believer might reply that the clarity is more than enough to show deliberate angles. And underlying every argument is a quiet, unsettling possibility. The possibility that neither side is entirely correct, that the structures are not simple mountains and not necessarily the work of an ancient civilization either. They could be something else, something that does not fit into any existing category, something we have not yet named. The debate grew even more complicated when enhanced versions of the images began circulating. Some editors increased the contrast, others sharpened the lines. Still others tried to remove distortions caused by atmosphere or snow glare. Each modified image revealed new details. Some of those details seemed to support the pyramid hypothesis. Others seemed to dismiss it. But no version settled the matter. At one point, digital analysts attempted three-dimensional reconstructions of the formations. Using software that estimates depth from shadow gradients, they produced models that looked shockingly architectural. Perfect slopes, defined faces, angles close to exact 90-degree intersections. Yet when professional geologists reviewed the models, they dismissed them as misleading. Too many assumptions, too much interpolation, too much trust in pixels shaped by algorithms rather than reality. And still the question remained: what are these structures? Official research groups offered no definitive investigation. The location is remote, the terrain is dangerous, the climate is unforgiving. Any expedition would require enormous funding and months of preparation. Governments do not see the value in sending teams to confirm whether a mountain is a mountain. Academic institutions cannot justify the cost. Private groups cannot secure permission, and so the debate exists in a suspended state. The photographs lie in the public domain, available for anyone to examine. The interpretations multiply. The mystery deepens not because evidence is lacking, but because the evidence refuses to behave. It is too sharp to dismiss and too vague to confirm. It sits at the border between belief and uncertainty. That is why this mystery endures. It does not offer clarity. It offers tension. It invites doubt into a space where doubt should not exist. It forces us to confront the limits of both science and speculation. It shows us that sometimes the truth is not hidden by intention, but hidden by circumstance, by distance, by ice, by the simple fact that no one is willing or able to go and look for themselves. The satellite images remain, silent, uninterpreted, waiting. They show shapes that should not be shapes, shadows that should not fall so evenly, angles that should not align so cleanly. And because of this, the question grows louder. If these formations are simply mountains, why do they not look like any other mountains in Antarctica? And if they are not mountains, then what exactly is rising through the ice? The answer is not in the images themselves. It lies in the next step, the next layer of explanation, the next confrontation between what we are told to believe and what we actually see. Whenever an unexplained shape appears in a remote part of the world, geology arrives first to answer for it. It makes sense. The planet has been shaping itself for billions of years. Mountains rise, glaciers carve valleys, wind erodes, ice fractures, and rock eventually accepts whatever form nature demands. Patterns emerge not by intention, but by repetition. And yet, as logical as this explanation sounds, there are moments when geology begins to feel less like a science and more like a shield. A shield meant to protect our understanding of the world from questions that might complicate everything we think we know. That uneasy feeling is nowhere stronger than in the discussion about Antarctica's Black Pyramids. When the images first circulated, geologists responded quickly. They described the triangular forms as typical results of glacial erosion. They introduced the term pyramidal nunatak, a mountain peak that stands above the ice, sharpened by cirques on all sides. They compared the Antarctic shapes to the Matterhorn in the Alps, which form through the same process. They showed diagrams illustrating how intersecting glacial valleys naturally carve slopes into triangular silhouettes. And they said it with such confidence that it sounded final. But when people look at the Black Pyramids, many feel that the explanation seems too clean, too comfortable, almost too quick. Part of the problem is that nature rarely produces perfect geometry. It can hint at it, it can approach it, but it seldom achieves the level of symmetry seen in the satellite photographs. The edges of the Antarctic structures appear smooth and straight. The angles rise with consistency. The faces look as though they were created with purpose, rather than by the slow accidents of time. Even geologists who defend the natural explanation admit privately that the formations appear unusually crisp. This is where the debate becomes strange. Those who question the natural origin of the pyramids do not deny geology. They simply point out that not all geology is equal. The planet is full of natural features that challenge expectations. Hexagonal basalt columns, circular impact craters, ice caves that form arches like cathedrals. The Earth is capable of wonder, but it is also capable of producing formations that seem almost deliberate. So the question is not whether nature can create shapes, it is whether nature can create these shapes in this place with this level of precision. One argument often used in the geological defense is that the Antarctic pyramids just look perfect because of the way snow settles on their surfaces. Smooth snow can hide irregularities and exaggerate symmetry. Shadows can sharpen angles. Low-resolution images can flatten jagged edges. In other words, the perfection is an illusion, a trick of perspective, a misunderstanding created by distance. But this explanation cuts both ways. If snow and shadow can disguise imperfections, they can also disguise intentions. What if the snow hides details that are not geological at all? What if the shadows reveal more than they conceal? What if the limitations of the images obscure something that only becomes visible when the mind steps back and considers the larger possibility? The more critics explore the geological explanation, the more it begins to sound like a default answer rather than a confident one. A conclusion reached not because evidence supports it fully, but because the alternative is too disruptive to entertain. Geology provides safety. It prevents the imagination from wandering where history prefers it not to go. But even within geology, inconsistencies appear. The slopes of the Antarctic pyramids seem too evenly eroded for structures that should have endured millions of years of harsh weather. The angles appear too uniform compared to nearby formations. The alignment of the shapes raises questions about natural processes that should produce randomness, not pattern. And perhaps most importantly, the landscape around the pyramids does not show the same degree of shaping one would expect if glaciers had carved these perfect forms. If glacial erosion can create near-perfect pyramids, why did it not create similar shapes across the entire region? Why do these formations stand out so dramatically? Why are they so localized? Why do they appear so isolated in a place where ice should have carved everything consistently? The deeper we look, the more the geological explanation becomes a balancing act. It can account for some features, but not all. It can dismiss some anomalies, but not others. It can provide context, but not clarity. There is also a psychological element at play. When science encounters an unusual phenomenon, it typically offers the simplest explanation first. This is a rational strategy. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, but the simplest explanation is not always the correct one. Sometimes it is simply the one that feels most comfortable, the one that does not require rewriting chapters of our understanding. And yet history repeatedly shows that the simplest explanation is often overturned. Meteorites were dismissed as folklore until scientists confirmed rocks could fall from the sky. The idea of continental drift was mocked until plate tectonics proved it real. Ancient structures once believed impossible for early civilizations turned out to be entirely within their capabilities. Time and again, consensus yields to evidence that was once considered too inconvenient to accept. So when geology says the pyramids are mountains, but the images show structures that look nothing like typical Antarctic mountains, skepticism grows. Not disbelief, but curiosity. The same curiosity that pushes science forward. There is also the uncomfortable fact that many major discoveries begin with experts being wrong. Not because they lack knowledge, but because their knowledge was incomplete. Each field of science has blind spots shaped by the assumptions it starts with, and geology assumes that Antarctic landscapes hold no human history at all. So any shape discovered there must be natural. That assumption shapes interpretation long before evidence is examined. If one begins with the belief that Antarctica has no human past, one sees only mountains. If one begins with an open question, the shapes become less certain. This does not mean the Black Pyramids are artificial. It means the geological explanation is not beyond questioning. And that is where the tension lies, between what we expect to see and what we actually see, between the explanations we accept and the possibilities we refuse to consider. For now, geology has offered what it can: a theory based on natural processes, a reasonable hypothesis. But the argument remains incomplete. Too many details remain unanswered. Too many questions remain open. Too many features remain suspiciously precise. The Black Pyramids do not fit neatly into the framework science prefers. They push against the boundaries of what geology can comfortably explain. They whisper of something more than erosion and ice. And so we return to the question that frames this entire mystery. Is geology describing the landscape as it truly is, or as it needs to be in order to protect the history we believe? Before that question can be answered, we must look beyond the formations themselves and consider the continent that surrounds them. A continent that hides more than ice and mountains. A continent that may be the perfect place to bury a truth that would change everything. There are places on Earth that resist discovery. Jungles, deserts, deep ocean trenches, volcanic islands. But none of them compare to Antarctica. None come close to the scale of its emptiness or the depth of its silence. If the planet wanted to hide something, if it wanted to erase a chapter of its past so completely that no civilization could retrieve it, this is where it would place it. In a continent designed not for life, but for forgetting. Antarctica is not simply isolated, it is sealed. Nearly every corner of the world has been mapped, crossed, photographed, excavated, or inhabited. But this continent has remained untouched, not because humans avoided it intentionally, but because nature made it nearly unreachable. Temperatures fall lower here than anywhere else on the planet. Winds accelerate to speeds that can strip away visibility in seconds. Storms rise without warning, turning the landscape into a moving blur of white and sound. Even the most advanced technology struggles against the conditions. Machines freeze, instruments fail, human endurance collapses. Yet beneath that violence lies a stillness that holds everything in place. Antarctica does not just bury the past, it preserves it. The ice sheet is the first layer of secrecy. In some regions it reaches more than 2 miles thick. That thickness is not static. It grows. It shifts. It compresses whatever lies beneath it with almost unimaginable force. A mountain range could vanish under that weight and leave no trace. A city could be swallowed whole. A structure could remain hidden for millions of years. The scale is so vast that even words struggle to convey it. The ice does not sit on the land. It engulfs it. But it is not only the depth of the ice that makes Antarctica the perfect vault for forgotten things. It is the way the ice behaves over time. Every snowfall adds a thin layer to the archive. Every winter locks that layer into place. The continent records climate, atmosphere, volcanic ash, cosmic dust, and environmental chemistry with precision sharper than any human instrument. Antarctica remembers everything except movement. The ice is a library that never opens its doors. Even when scientists drill ice cores and extract narrow cylinders of frozen history, they reach back only a fraction of what lies below. They recover data, not artifacts. They find signals, not stories. The core samples tell us how the Earth breathed, not who walked upon it. The ice protects its secrets too well. Geographers like to describe Antarctica as a blank space. But that blankness is not absence. It is suppression. It is a mask placed over an entire world we cannot reach. The surface is calm, but the land beneath is unknown. More than 90% of the continent is invisible. More than 90% of its features exist in darkness, untouched since long before humans appeared. This darkness creates an uncomfortable thought. If something extraordinary existed here, who would ever know? Even the modern world stands at a distance from the continent. Satellites pass overhead, but they cannot penetrate the deepest layers of ice. Planes fly across the surface, but they cannot land on most of it. Humans inhabit only a handful of scientific stations, each surrounded by thousands of miles of nothing. A person could walk for weeks and never see a single landmark. A shape that appears on satellite imagery could remain unvisited for a lifetime. A discovery could be waiting just beyond the range of exploration, and no one would ever encounter it. Antarctica offers a unique form of invisibility. Not the invisibility of darkness, but the invisibility of inaccessibility. There is a difference. Darkness hides things. Inaccessibility erases them. If an object lies beyond reach long enough, eventually people stop asking whether it is there at all. Knowledge does not fade. Curiosity fades. The continent takes advantage of this. It encourages indifference. Even scientists admit that Antarctica receives less direct exploration than the Moon. Some regions of the seafloor are better mapped than the land beneath the Antarctic ice sheet. Entire mountain ranges remain unnamed. Lakes stretch under the surface, with openings no instrument has yet detected. There could be caverns large enough to swallow skyscrapers. There could be geological features that defy everything we know. And if anything man-made lay hidden there, untouched by wind or water or time, the ice would protect it with perfect loyalty. In this sense, the Black Pyramids appear in the only place where they could. A place where discovery is not a guarantee, but an accident. A place where the planet itself prevents verification. A place where ambiguity can survive unchallenged. This is what makes the structures so troubling. If they existed in the Andes or the Himalayas, we would have already reached them. We would have examined them, measured them, touched their surfaces, studied their composition. But Antarctica denies that opportunity. It turns every anomaly into a riddle. It transforms every question into a stalemate. The continent does not need to hide answers. It simply needs to make the journey toward those answers nearly impossible. Even now, with advanced imaging technology and high-resolution mapping, we still know almost nothing about the finer details hidden beneath the snow. Satellites capture shapes but not textures. Radar penetrates ice but not in perfect clarity. Drones can fly, but they cannot survive the temperatures long enough to perform deep surveys. And people, the most adaptable explorers of all, find themselves pushed back by a cold that respects no boundary and offers no second chances. This limitation forces us into speculation, not because we prefer speculation, but because it is the only option available when half the continent is locked away from observation. We must imagine what we cannot reach. We must ask questions without expecting answers. And the more the ice refuses to reveal its secrets, the more significant each unexplained shape becomes. Antarctica holds power not because of what we know about it, but because of what we cannot know. It blurs the line between possibility and impossibility. It allows contradictions to coexist. It permits mysteries to remain unresolved. When we look at the Black Pyramids, we are not only looking at objects within the landscape. We are looking at the effect the landscape has on our certainty. It destabilizes the confidence with which we define the past. The continent creates the perfect stage for something extraordinary to exist without proof. Too remote to investigate, too dangerous to excavate, too vast to search, too silent to contradict any claim. And so a question grows in the space between visibility and invisibility. If something remarkable did lie beneath the ice, if some structure or artifact or memory of a forgotten age existed here, How would we ever find it? And if we cannot find it, how can we be certain it was never there at all? Human beings have always lived inside patterns. We create them. We search for them. We rely on them to make sense of a world that rarely explains itself. The rising sun becomes a cycle. A series of storms becomes a season. A strange coincidence becomes a sign. Whether we are conscious of it or not, the mind is always reaching outward, trying to find shapes in the noise. It is a survival instinct as old as thought itself. So when the images of Antarctica's Black Pyramids spread across the world, it was no surprise that people began to see something more than mountains. They saw patterns. They saw familiarity. They saw echoes of structures built thousands of years ago by civilizations that should have had nothing in common with one another. But the question that hovered above all the speculation was simple. Are these patterns imagined, or are they remembered? The human brain is not designed to ignore geometry. Straight lines, right angles, repeating slopes. Symmetrical forms, these trigger something deep within us. We are drawn to them because they suggest intention. They imply intelligence. They separate randomness from meaning. When we see a triangle rising from the snow, part of us cannot help but ask who or what placed it there. Scientists often explain this reaction using terms like pareidolia and apophenia. Pareidolia is the tendency to see familiar forms where none exist, like faces in clouds or shapes in rock. Apophenia is the broader tendency to find patterns in random information. Both are real psychological effects. Both influence the way we interpret the world, but they are not the whole story. They are not explanations. They are reminders that the mind is active even when the world is silent, and sometimes the world is not silent at all. The Black Pyramids resemble a structure that has appeared across human history with strange consistency. The pyramid shape is one of the oldest and most widespread forms of architecture. It appears in Egypt, in Mesoamerica, in China, in Sudan, in Europe, and in prehistoric structures whose origins remain unknown. Civilizations separated by oceans and millennia built the same geometric form as if responding to the same idea. Archaeologists explain this pattern by pointing to simple physics. A wide base and narrowing sides create stability. The shape does not require advanced tools. It resists collapse. It allows weight to stack without sophisticated engineering. This is why pyramids appear everywhere, they say, not because of a shared origin. And yet, the explanation feels incomplete. Civilizations across the world did not only build pyramids, they built them with astronomical alignments. They built them with symbolic meaning. They built them because the form carried significance. It represented mountains, gods, creation myths, cosmological order. The shape did not only serve structure, it served memory. So when people see pyramid-like forms emerging from the Antarctic ice, their reactions go beyond instinct. They go toward familiarity, towards something ancient, towards something shared. The shape speaks to something that seems older than any culture we can name. This is why the psychological explanation, though helpful, cannot dismiss the deeper question. If the mind is predisposed to see meaning in shapes, could it be predisposed because shapes once held meaning? Could the recognition itself be a kind of echo? A faint imprint of a story so old that it survives only as an instinct? The possibility is unsettling. It suggests that pattern recognition might not only be a biological reflex, it might be a memory of something humanity lived through long before recorded history began. When we examine the psychological debates surrounding the Black Pyramids, we encounter a paradox. The more we try to prove that the shapes are natural and our reactions are irrational, the more power we give to the reaction itself. If humans respond so strongly to the form of a pyramid, why would that form appear in a place that should not contain any traces of culture or design? Why that shape? Why that geometry? Why here? The mind resists randomness not because it is flawed, but because randomness rarely describes reality. The universe has order woven into its foundation. Stars form patterns. Rivers trace predictable paths. Mountains rise according to rules. And life evolves through structures that repeat across species. Patterns are not illusions. They are the language of existence. So when people look at the Antarctic formations and feel the pull of recognition, it is not foolishness. It is sensitivity. It is awareness. It is an ancient instinct waking in the presence of something that resembles what our ancestors once knew. The challenge comes from the tension between what we are expected to believe and what we actually perceive. Official explanations tell us that Antarctica has no human history, therefore no shape found there can be connected to civilization. But perception challenges that belief. The mind sees a pyramid. The memory of the human story sees a resonance. The pattern feels intentional because it feels familiar. And familiarity, especially in a place where nothing should be familiar, becomes suspicious. Some researchers suggest that humans did not invent the pyramid. They discovered it. They discovered it in the natural forms of mountains, dunes, and the slopes of eroding landscapes. The shape may have been a gift from nature, adopted into culture, replicated across continents. If that idea is true, then the Antarctic pyramids could be another example of nature presenting the same geometry. But this raises an even deeper question. If nature is capable of producing pyramids that look indistinguishable from structures built by ancient civilizations, how do we determine the difference between natural and intentional design? What criteria do we use? What level of similarity crosses the threshold from coincidence to possibility? The debate is not about a single set of formations buried in ice. It is about the limitations of our interpretation. It is about the boundaries we place around the past. It is about whether the patterns we see are accidents or clues. There is an uncomfortable truth that emerges from this. When people look at the Black Pyramids, they are not simply seeing shapes in snow, they are seeing something that challenges the story they have been taught. They are sensing a fracture in the narrative of human origins. They are confronting the idea that civilization may not have begun where our textbooks say it did, that it may not have begun when our calendars say it did. This is why the debate is so persistent. Not because the evidence is clear, but because the shape itself refuses dismissal. When human beings encounter a pattern that does not fit their understanding, they are faced with a choice. They can ignore it, or they can follow it. And here, in the cold silence of Antarctica, the pattern seems to be waiting. It does not shout. It does not demand. It simply persists. A geometric whisper rising from the ice. A shape the mind is not designed to overlook. Before we can decide what it means, we must examine another layer of the mystery, a layer where the past and the present collide, a layer involving maps that should not exist. Long before satellites revealed Antarctica's strange black pyramids, long before the world understood how vast the southern ice sheet truly was, a different mystery emerged from a piece of parchment. Not a modern photograph, not a digital reconstruction, a map, hand-drawn in 1513 by an Ottoman admiral named Piri Reis, a map that should have shown only the lands known to sailors of the 16th century, a map that should not contain anything surprising at all. But the map did contain something surprising, something impossible. It seemed to show a coastline far to the south, a coastline with a shape that resembled Antarctica, not as a frozen continent, but as a landmass without ice. Smooth, detailed, precise, centuries before anyone had ever reached the region. At first glance, this claim sounds exaggerated. An old map is a fragile thing. Ink fades, lines distort, interpretations change. Many historians insist the southern landmass on the Piri Reis map is simply a stylized extension of South America. Decorative, symbolic, misunderstood. But the more scholars inspected the document, the more difficult it became to dismiss the southern shape as coincidence. Its outline curved like Antarctica's Queen Maud Land. Its proportions matched contours that modern radar would not confirm until the 20th century. It hinted at a world unknown to the cartographers of the Renaissance. This is where the debate surrounding the map becomes as divided as the one surrounding the Black Pyramids. Some researchers argue that Piri Reis had access to older charts now lost. Charts supposedly created by ancient mariners who mapped the world long before recorded history. Others argue that the resemblance to Antarctica is accidental and that no one in 1513 could possibly have known such a continent existed. But the question refuses to settle. If the map truly shows Antarctica, two problems appear immediately. The first is that the continent was not officially discovered until 1820. The second is that even if someone had glimpsed the land earlier, they would have seen only ice. Antarctica has been covered in ice for millions of years. There is no record of a time in human history when the coastline could have been mapped ice-free. Unless the mapping happened not in human history as we know it, but far earlier. This idea is one that traditional historians avoid, but alternative researchers explore with unusual determination. They point to small textual notes written by Piri Reis himself. In the margins of the map, the admiral explains that he drew his chart using older documents, some of which he believed dated back thousands of years. He does not name the civilizations that produced them. He only states that they were ancient, that they were accurate, that he trusted them. This admission alone raises a question so large that it reshapes the entire conversation. Who created the original maps? And how could those people know the shape of a coastline buried beneath miles of ice? Scientists offer one possible explanation. They suggest that the resemblance between Queen Maud Land and the southern landmass on the map is superficial, that the curves align only because the human mind wants them to align, that Piri Reis may have simply extended the coastline of South America because early explorers believed the two continents might be connected. It is a reasonable argument, but it does not explain why the shape on the map resembles modern radar imagery more closely than early colonial maps. It does not explain why other elements of the map contain startling accuracy regarding the Caribbean and Africa, suggesting the cartographer was working from sophisticated source material. It does not explain why the southern landmass appears to have been drawn with confidence rather than speculation. The uncertainty surrounding the map forces us to think beyond geography. It invites us to consider whether the past was more complex than we assume. Perhaps ancient sailors travelled farther than we believe. Perhaps they developed methods of navigation that have been lost. Perhaps there were civilizations that rose and fell before the societies we study today. Civilizations that may have possessed knowledge we now think of as modern. None of these ideas can be proven with certainty, but they cannot be dismissed either. The most unsettling aspect of the Piri Reis map is not its accuracy, but its implication. If the southern continent on the map is indeed Antarctica, and if it was mapped before it was buried in ice, then humanity is not the first species on this planet to achieve exploration and mapping on a global scale. Someone else came before us. Someone with the ability to chart coastlines that predate our entire understanding of geological history. And if that is true, then the Black Pyramids in Antarctica begin to look less like anomalies and more like remnants. Evidence not of isolated mystery, but of a systematic pattern. A pattern suggesting that something significant once occurred in regions now unreachable. A pattern hinting that the southern continent may have played a role in a chapter of Earth's history that has been erased almost completely. None of this proves the pyramids are artificial, but it complicates the argument that they must be natural. If a map from 500 years ago may contain information far older than itself, then how many other fragments of the past remain hidden in plain sight? How many clues lie scattered across artifacts, manuscripts, ruins, and landscapes waiting to be reinterpreted? The Piri Reis map stands at the boundary between accepted history and forbidden speculation. It does not provide answers. It provides pressure. It pushes against the walls of the story we have been taught. It suggests that the world once looked different from how we imagine it. It implies that knowledge can survive long after the civilizations that produced it have vanished. And it invites one final question. If a forgotten society once mapped Antarctica before the ice came, did they also build something there? Something that could still be standing beneath the frozen surface. Something that has waited for millions of years while the world changed above it. Something that modern satellite images now reveal as dark shapes rising through the snow. Before we explore that possibility, we must first understand a deeper truth. Antarctica was not always a land of ice. It was once alive. Long before it became a kingdom of ice, Antarctica was something entirely different. Not a frozen desert, not a lifeless expanse, not a silent plain of wind and white. It was a place of warmth, a place of rivers, a place covered in forests that stretched across valleys and mountains now buried under miles of frozen weight. If one imagines the continent today, this picture feels impossible. Yet the evidence is unmistakable. Antarctica was once alive. Scientists discovered this truth not through speculation, but through layers of sediment trapped deep beneath the ice. In the cores extracted from the continent, researchers found fragments of pollen that came from trees and flowering plants. They found ancient spores. They found traces of soil that could only have formed in a humid and temperate climate. They even found chemical signatures that suggested seasonal cycles similar to those in forests found much farther north. This discovery changed everything. It pushed the timeline of Antarctica's past into a world so unfamiliar that even specialists struggled to comprehend it. At one point, around 90 million years ago, the continent supported vegetation so dense that even the polar night could not kill it. Trees stood in darkness for months at a time and still survived. Ecosystems flourished beneath skies that alternated between long twilight summers and endless winter night. But this picture became even stranger as more evidence surfaced. Beneath the ice, radar instruments detected ancient river systems. Not small streams, but sprawling networks of channels carved into the landscape long before ice covered them. These were rivers that once carried water across a land rich in life. They shaped valleys. They carved passageways. They supported environments that modern Antarctica could never sustain. The deeper scientists looked, the more contradictions emerged. Fossilized fragments of forest floor revealed roots and leaves from species that do not exist anywhere in the world today. Chemical signatures indicated warm climates that contradicted what Antarctica should have experienced even in earlier geological periods. Something in this story felt misaligned, as though the continent had lived through changes far more dramatic than mainstream models could fully explain. None of this proves that humans ever lived in Antarctica. The timeline appears too ancient, the ages too distant. But the discoveries force a question that cannot be ignored. If Antarctica was once warm enough to sustain forests and rivers, how many other ages of warmth existed? How many periods of habitability have been forgotten? How many transitions between warm and frozen worlds have occurred without leaving clear records? We often imagine the world as stable, but Antarctica reveals a different truth. Continents shift. Oceans rise and fall. Climates transform on scales that erase entire landscapes. It is not impossible to think that earlier warm periods existed more recently than we believe. Geological time is not always a smooth and predictable line. It contains gaps. It contains transitions so abrupt that they seem almost unnatural. This is where the mystery deepens. For decades, researchers studying Earth's past have attempted to reconstruct the climates of ancient Antarctica. Some models suggest it was once closer to the equator. Others argue that its warm periods coincided with atmospheric conditions radically different from those of today. but no model fully explains the rapid shift from a thriving environment to a frozen wasteland. This dramatic transformation raises a question with implications far beyond geology. If Antarctica experienced such extreme shifts, how likely is it that some traces of life or early culture could have existed during a window of habitability? Not modern humans, not known civilizations, but earlier forms of intelligence, earlier expressions of organization, even simple societies. The possibility is rarely discussed openly, but it lingers in the background of scientific exploration. Some researchers quietly wonder whether ancient Antarctica might hold evidence of organisms or species that adapted to environments unknown elsewhere. Others speculate that transitions between warm and cold periods could have preserved biological signatures in ways we have not yet discovered. The continent is vast. The layers of ice conceal millions of years of transformation. The possibility of something unexpected surviving that long cannot be dismissed entirely. The terrain beneath the ice complicates the story even further. Radar imaging has revealed mountains as tall as the Alps, valleys deeper than those in many modern continents, and networks of basins that could once have held lakes or inland seas. The picture that emerges is not a barren land. It is a landscape with contours, elevations, and features similar to those that supported ancient civilizations in other parts of the world. The resemblance is not evidence, but it is intriguing. The idea that such a landscape once existed makes the present state of Antarctica appear even more mysterious. What other continents have been reshaped so completely that their past forms have been forgotten? How many civilizations in human history have risen and fallen without leaving traces? How many natural events have erased evidence we assume could never be erased? Every discovery in Antarctica raises the stakes for the mystery of the Black Pyramids. If the continent was once warm and habitable, the idea of structures existing there becomes less impossible. If the land once held forests and rivers, it could have supported life capable of shaping the environment. If mountains once stood above green landscapes rather than ice, the possibility of intentional construction becomes a question rather than a fantasy. To this day, the scientific community maintains that no human civilization ever lived in Antarctica, and that position is reasonable based on what we currently know. But the same scientific community agrees on something else, something equally important. Our understanding of Earth's ancient climate is incomplete. Our models contain uncertainties. Our reconstructions rely on fragments of evidence that represent only a fraction of the whole story. It is not science that closes the question. It is the lack of access to the continent itself. The ice prevents direct exploration. The storms prevent long-term expeditions. The vastness prevents comprehensive mapping. Antarctica is a locked archive, and every piece of information we extract is a clue pulled from underneath layers we still cannot penetrate. The ancient forests beneath the ice prove one thing with absolute certainty. The Antarctica of the past was not the Antarctica we know. It was a world that could support life. A world transformed by forces we still struggle to understand. A world that might hold memories older than anything left standing on the continents we inhabit today. And if the land was once alive, then the next question becomes inevitable. What else lies beneath the ice? What else survived the transitions? What else might be waiting in the darkness of a continent that once thrived under sunlit skies? Before we confront that question, we must dive deeper into the terrain concealed beneath the frozen surface, a terrain that hides far more than ancient forests. If the surface of Antarctica feels like a world of silence, the land beneath it feels like a world of secrets, a place where nothing moves, nothing speaks, and nothing escapes. Yet in that vast frozen darkness lies one of the most astonishing geological discoveries ever made. A mountain range the size of the Alps, completely buried beneath the ice. A range so large, so sharp, and so unexpectedly young that scientists struggled to accept its existence when it was first detected. These are the Gamburtsev Mountains, a hidden world inside a hidden world. Their discovery began not with the eyes of explorers, but with instruments that listened to echoes. Radar pulses were sent down into the ice, and what returned was not the flat bedrock scientists expected. Instead, the signals revealed peaks, ridges, valleys, and sweeping slopes stretching across thousands of miles. The images resembled scans of a mountain chain found in any other continent, yet no human had ever seen these mountains. No animal had walked across them. No river flowed through their valleys. They had been locked away for millions of years, protected by a shield of ice thicker than the tallest skyscrapers on Earth. What made the discovery even more unsettling was the shape of the mountains themselves. Their peaks were sharp, their edges crisp, their slopes clean and youthful. Mountains normally take millions of years to erode into smoother forms, but these appeared almost untouched by time. Some scientists described them as frozen in their prime, preserved by the ice. Others wondered if they were much younger than expected, and a few, more quietly, questioned why their geometry felt so precise. This is where the mystery deepens. The Gamburtsev Range does not resemble the kind of distorted or worn-down bedrock one might expect beneath 3 kilometers of ice. It resembles something protected, something preserved, something almost deliberately sealed away. When researchers mapped the terrain further, they found something else. Basins large enough to hold massive lakes, channels that looked like ancient river systems, valleys that descended in smooth arcs rather than chaotic fractures. The subglacial world appeared organized, structured, symmetrical. The land beneath the ice almost looked as though it had once supported flowing water, stable climates, and conditions far different from the frozen desert above. But the most intriguing detail came from the radar reflections themselves. In some regions, the signals bounced back more strongly than expected, as though they were striking not only rock, but hollow spaces, cavities, chambers, pockets of emptiness within the mountains. Most scientists dismissed these anomalies as natural variations in density, yet the possibility remained. What if these echoes were revealing features unlike anything we have seen on other continents? The idea seems extraordinary until one remembers how little we actually know about what lies beneath. The Gamburtsev Range has never been directly explored. There are no photographs of its peaks, no samples from its valleys, no expeditions that have touched its stone. Everything we understand comes from echoes travelling through ice. And even those echoes raise more questions than answers. Why are these mountains so sharp? Why do they appear so young? Why do river-like channels run alongside their slopes? Why does the terrain feel so intentional, so coherent, so well organized? Is it simply the way nature chose to carve the inner landscape of Antarctica? Or is there something else beneath the surface? Something our instruments can sense but not yet reveal. The Black Pyramids on the surface suddenly seem less isolated when placed in this context. If a hidden mountain range can remain completely unknown until the 21st century, what else might be concealed beneath the ice? If the land beneath Antarctica can hold valleys, rivers, basins and peaks untouched for millions of years, what prevents it from holding structures as well? The environment is perfect for preservation. The ice is stable. The temperature is consistent. The darkness protects everything beneath it from erosion, weathering, and decay. In this sense, the Gamburtsev Range does more than challenge geology. It challenges imagination. It forces us to consider the possibility that Antarctica may not be a blank wasteland, but a vault. A place designed by nature to store the past in layers so deep that only the most precise instruments can detect them. There is also the question of alignment. Some researchers notice that certain subglacial peaks appear to form linear or triangular arrangements. Not perfect, not sharp enough to draw conclusions, but distinct enough to raise eyebrows. Natural formations often produce randomness. But these seem to hold traces of pattern. Again, not proof, but pressure. Skeptics argue that humans see patterns where none exist, that the brain creates meaning from noise, that the Gamburtsev Range is simply a mountain range like any other, hidden beneath ice and made intriguing only because it is inaccessible. Yet even skeptics admit that the range should have eroded long before the ice sheet formed. Something preserved it. Something held it in place. Something sealed it away. This is not to say the mountains were built, but the conditions required to maintain their shape in such a pristine state are rare. And rare conditions often invite rare possibilities. One possibility is that the landscape beneath Antarctica may contain remnants of earlier worlds. Not necessarily human, not necessarily civilizations as we imagine them, but traces of ecosystems, structures, or geological formations from ages when the continent was warm. Ages that could have supported life of types we have not yet discovered. Ages that ended abruptly when the climate changed and the ice advanced. What those remnants might be is unknown. What they could reveal is unimaginable. For now, we stand at a distance from the truth. We have maps but no access, data but no confirmation, echoes but no images. The ice keeps its silence, the mountains sleep, the valleys remain untouched, and the radar continues to send back signals that challenge our expectations. The Gamburtsev Range reminds us that mystery does not require belief. It requires only absence. Absence of knowledge, absence of access, absence of certainty. And Antarctica is a continent built on all three. The discovery of these hidden mountains changed the way scientists viewed the land beneath the ice. It also changed the way many viewed the Black Pyramids on the surface. Because if an entire mountain range can remain invisible for millions of years, how difficult would it be for something smaller, something artificial, something deliberate, to remain hidden as well? Before we confront that possibility, we must turn to an even stranger part of Antarctica's story, a part not written in stone but in the ice itself. Ice is not simply frozen water. In Antarctica, it is memory, layered, compressed and preserved with a precision that no human record can match. Each winter adds a whisper. Each snowfall adds a page. Each freeze locks history in place. Over time, these pages merge into a single archive stretching back hundreds of thousands of years. An archive that remembers every volcanic eruption, every shift in atmospheric composition, every arrival of dust from distant deserts, and every change in temperature so slight that no living creature would have noticed it. Scientists call these layers ice cores, but that name feels inadequate. A core is something simple, something structural. But these cylinders of frozen time are more than structure. They are narrative. They are evidence. They are the closest thing to a planetary diary that humanity has ever recovered. When researchers drill into the ice of Antarctica, they are not performing geology. They are performing archaeology on the atmosphere itself. Each meter of ice extracted from the depths contains air bubbles trapped during distant eras. These bubbles hold the breath of ancient Earth. They tell stories about climates long vanished, about sudden catastrophes, about subtle shifts that ripple across centuries. They reveal patterns that the surface has long forgotten. For most of the scientific community, this archive is a window into climate history. It explains glacial cycles. It reveals greenhouse gas fluctuations. It maps the rise and fall of temperatures across time. But for those who look more deeply, ice cores pose a different question. If the ice records everything, what does it say about the world before the ice came? What clues remain from the transitions between warm and frozen ages? What traces of life, phenomena, or even forgotten structures might lie encoded in these frozen layers? Occasionally, the ice reveals something unexpected. Thin particles of ash appear in places with no nearby volcanic source. Layers of dust appear from continents thousands of miles away. Chemical anomalies emerge that do not match any known climate pattern. Most of these mysteries have reasonable explanations, but not all of them. One of the most troubling features in the ice record is the presence of abrupt transitions. Temperatures rise or fall dramatically within a few decades, sometimes within a few years. These shifts are so extreme that even modern climate models struggle to explain them. If Antarctica once held life, these transitions would have been devastating. They would have erased ecosystems, changed coastlines, and transformed landscapes in ways that leave almost no trace on the surface. This raises a possibility that few confront openly. If an earlier warm age ended quickly, could it have buried more than forests? Could it have buried evidence of something we have not yet considered? Something that would not decay easily? Something that might still exist beneath the ice, untouched by time? Ice does not discriminate. It records whatever enters its domain. Dust, pollen, minerals, fragments of unknown origin, microscopic remnants of life, and even particles that defy easy categorization. Researchers occasionally find objects whose origins remain ambiguous. Some are dismissed as contamination. Others are attributed to rare natural events. But every unexplained sample includes a deeper question. What else lies beneath the layers we have not yet reached? The oldest ice core retrieved from Antarctica reaches back more than 800,000 years. But beneath that, the ice is too compressed, too distorted, too ancient for clean extraction. That means our window into the past covers less than 1,000,000 years. The Earth, however, has held habitable climates for far longer. Warm periods occurred repeatedly. Whole worlds rose and fell before the ice we study was even formed. This limitation creates a blind spot in our understanding. If anything existed during those earlier warm ages, we would not see it in the ice. The archive would contain only the final stages before the freeze, a snapshot of the last climate, not the world that came before it. Some scientists suggest that earlier layers might still hold clues hidden in transformed chemical signatures or fragmented isotopes. Others believe that the deeper layers might one day be reconstructed with new technology. But for now, most of Antarctica's true history remains beyond reach, locked beneath a weight of ice that cannot be drilled without destroying the very story we seek. And so we rely on what the ice does reveal: details of sudden temperature spikes, evidence of volcanic winters, layers rich with fragments of unknown origin. These anomalies paint a picture of a world that has experienced repeated cycles of destruction and renewal. A world where dramatic changes erased landscapes and ecosystems in short spans of time. A world where the possibility of forgotten chapters becomes less far-fetched. The ice does not confirm lost civilizations. It does not reveal the origins of the Black Pyramids. It does not point directly to any artificial structure buried beneath the surface. But it raises an undeniable question. If the Earth underwent transitions so extreme that entire environments vanished, how much knowledge, evidence, or memory might have been lost along the way? In the quiet laboratories where scientists examine ice cores under microscopes, there is always a moment when the past becomes strangely intimate. A tiny bubble trapped in the ice expands slightly under the warmth of the room. With it rises air that has not touched sunlight in hundreds of thousands of years. The breath of a world older than human thought escapes into the present. This moment reveals something humbling. The planet holds far more history than we can ever witness, and it conceals that history with equal generosity. Our species occupies only a sliver of time. The ice reminds us of what we missed, what we will never know, what existed before our first ancestors learned fire or language or myth. In this way, Antarctica becomes a paradox. It reveals fragments of the past while hiding the rest. It offers evidence of worlds long gone while protecting the deeper stories beneath miles of frozen silence. It shows us a memory that is both intimate and incomplete. The Black Pyramids draw attention because they appear out of place. But it is the ice that gives those shapes context. The ice proves that the world has changed violently. The ice proves that land can transform beyond recognition. The ice proves that entire environments can vanish without trace. And it proves something else as well. If the planet can forget forests, rivers, and entire climates, how difficult would it be for it to forget a structure? Before we consider that possibility, we must explore another part of Antarctica's hidden world. Not the land beneath the ice, and not the ice itself, but the life that should not exist there at all. Under the Antarctic ice, where darkness is absolute and temperatures fall far below anything life should endure, lies a world that was never meant to be discovered. A world without sunlight. A world without seasons. A world so isolated that it has been sealed away for millions of years, untouched by the atmosphere above it. And within that world, life persists. The first hint of this hidden domain came not from explorers, but from satellites detecting strange movements in the ice. Small shifts, patterns of flow that suggested liquid water far beneath the frozen surface. At first, the idea seemed absurd. How could water exist at temperatures so low? But the pressure of miles of ice, combined with heat rising from the Earth's interior, created conditions where lakes could form in total darkness. Soon, scientists identified more than one such lake, then dozens. Eventually, over 400. Lake Vostok became the most famous among them, a body of water roughly the size of Lake Ontario, sealed beneath more than 3 kilometers of ice. A place where no sunlight has reached for at least 15 million years. A place that should have been sterile. And yet, when researchers finally sampled the water, they found something unexpected: microbial life. Organisms that appeared adapted to extreme pressure, extreme cold, and absolute darkness. Life that had survived in isolation for so long that it resembled no known microbial community on the surface. Life that should not exist and yet does. This discovery shifted the entire conversation about what Antarctica might be hiding. If life can survive in a lake sealed off from the world for millions of years, what else might have endured? What else might have adapted? What else might lie preserved beneath layers of ice that protect rather than destroy? Lake Vostok is only one example. Other subglacial lakes show chemical signatures that suggest biological activity. Some contain traces of methane that indicate microbial metabolism. Others show signs of moving water, as though under ice rivers still shift and flow in the darkness. Subglacial ecosystems appear more dynamic than anyone imagined. It is a world that should not exist, operating under rules we barely understand. This raises a profound question. If life can be preserved in these lakes for millions of years, what else can the ice protect? What other forms of existence could remain trapped, dormant, waiting? We often think of ice as a destroyer of life, but in Antarctica, the ice is both destroyer and guardian. It erases the world above while preserving the world below. The presence of life in these hidden lakes forces us to rethink the limits of biology. These organisms have adapted to conditions without sunlight, without fresh nutrients, without changes in temperature, without contact with the atmosphere. They are survivors of a world long gone, relics of ecosystems that vanished from the surface ages ago. They exist because the ice sealed them in a perfect stasis, protecting them from everything that eradicated life elsewhere. If microorganisms can survive in this environment, could larger life forms have existed during Antarctica's warm periods? Could traces of that life still be preserved in pockets beneath the ice? Could organic structures remain intact? Could remnants of ecosystems that flourished millions of years ago still lie hidden in the darkness? These are speculative questions, but they arise naturally from the evidence. The subglacial lakes are not anomalies. They are part of a complex, interconnected system. Some lakes drain into others, Some refill through channels beneath the ice. Water moves. Nutrients circulate. Chemical reactions continue. The environments are not static. They are alive in slow motion. This fact creates an unsettling possibility. If these lakes can remain stable for millions of years, they could preserve not just microorganisms, but other traces of life that once inhabited the continent. The ice above acts like a barrier, preventing contamination from the modern world. Anything trapped beneath it remains in the same state it existed when the ice first formed. This brings us back to the Black Pyramids. Not because there is direct evidence linking them to subglacial life, but because Antarctica proves capable of storing the impossible. Life where there should be none. Mountains preserved where erosion should have erased them. Rivers traced into bedrock where no water has flowed for ages. A continent that hides more than it reveals. As researchers continue to explore these subglacial lakes, they find signs of complexity that challenge expectations. Strange chemical gradients. Unknown microbial strains. Interactions between water and bedrock that generate unique energy sources. Life using methods of survival that do not exist anywhere else on Earth. Life that seems adapted to a world older than the one we know. This raises a deeper question. Could life beneath Antarctica be a remnant of an ancient biosphere that once covered the continent before the ice took hold? Could it be a living memory of a time when forests and rivers covered the land? Could the subglacial world be the last surviving echo of an age we have forgotten? And if such life exists, what does it mean for structures beneath the ice? If biological material can persist in the harshest conditions imaginable, then stone, metal, or artificial structures would survive far more easily. They would endure the cold. They would endure the pressure. They would endure the silence. The ice would freeze them in time, just as it froze the lakes and the life within them. This does not prove that anything artificial lies beneath the ice, but it proves that Antarctica has the capacity to preserve things far beyond what we once believed possible. It proves that the continent holds more than geological history. It holds biological history as well. History that did not vanish. History that adapted and endured. In this way, Antarctica becomes more than a frozen desert. It becomes a bridge between eras. A place where the past continues to exist alongside the present. A place where life refuses extinction even when cut off from the world. A place where the boundaries of possibility stretch almost beyond imagination. The more we learn about these subglacial environments, the more one truth emerges. Antarctica is not dead. It is dormant. It is waiting. Its lakes breathe slowly in the darkness. Its ecosystems cling to existence with patience older than humanity, and its ice preserves everything with equal care, from microbes to mountains to mysteries we have yet to uncover. Before we can explore what this means for the Black Pyramids, we must confront a question that has lingered in the background since the beginning. If Antarctica once held life, and if it can preserve life for millions of years, what are the chances that something more than biology once existed here? And what evidence might remain beneath the layers we have not yet reached? Across every continent, long before the invention of writing or metal tools, human beings built structures that still defy explanation. Pyramids rising from desert sand, mounds shaped with astronomical precision, stone platforms aligned to stars that ancient eyes should never have been able to see so clearly. Everywhere we look, early civilizations display a level of organization, intention, and understanding that appears far greater than their recorded histories suggest. Archaeology explains these achievements through evolution of culture. Each society developed independently, drawing ideas from observation and necessity. This is a reasonable explanation. Yet one detail lingers, quiet but persistent. The forms they created often resemble one another so closely that coincidence feels strained. The same geometric shapes appear across the world. The same alignments repeat. The same patterns arise from cultures separated by oceans and thousands of years. This is where Antarctica enters the discussion in a way that makes many researchers uncomfortable. The Black Pyramids discovered in satellite images resemble the shapes found in Egypt, in Mesoamerica, in China, in Sudan, and across prehistoric Europe. They echo a pattern that stretches across human history, a pattern that has no clear origin and no obvious point of transmission. Either many civilizations discovered the same form independently, or they inherited an idea older than all of them. The suggestion that a mother civilization once existed a society that predates recorded history and influenced later cultures is one of the most controversial ideas in anthropology. Mainstream scholarship resists it for good reason. There is no direct evidence linking these structures across the world, no artifacts connecting them, no written record describing a common ancestor. Without those pieces, the idea remains speculation. Yet the idea persists, not because it offers a dramatic story, but because patterns refuse to disappear. The human mind does not simply imagine connections, it recognizes echoes. It senses familiarity where none should exist. And when it encounters something that belongs to a pattern, but sits outside the established timeline, like the Antarctic pyramids, it begins to question the story it has been taught. If the Black Pyramids on the surface of Antarctica are natural, then the pattern ends. But if they are not, then the implications are enormous, not just for geology or archaeology, but for the entire narrative of human origins. It would mean that a civilization existed in a place now buried under 3 kilometers of ice. A civilization that lived during a warm age and vanished when the world changed. A civilization older than any we have documented. This is not a claim. It is a question. A question that arises not from myth, but from the gaps in our knowledge. Every known civilization appears suddenly in the archaeological record. Writing systems emerge fully formed. Architectural techniques arrive with sophistication that suggests earlier experimentation. Religious symbols mirror one another across cultures that should have had no contact. Tools, monuments, and cosmologies often appear without clear developmental precursors, as though humanity awakened with memories it did not understand. Some researchers propose that these similarities arise because human intelligence converges on the same solutions. People observe the sky, so they align structures to it. People need stability, so they build pyramids for structural support. People share similar instincts and aesthetic preferences. This explanation is logical, but it does not address the deeper question. Why do these solutions appear so early and so suddenly? Why do they emerge in forms that suggest refinement rather than experimentation? This is where Antarctica becomes more than a geological curiosity. It becomes a missing piece of a larger puzzle. A puzzle that suggests the world may have hosted civilizations during earlier warm periods, long before the societies we study today. Civilizations erased not by conquest or decay, but by climate. By catastrophic shifts that buried their lands, flooded their cities, or consumed their regions with ice. If such civilizations existed, they would leave traces not on the surface, but beneath it. They would leave structures preserved by the same ice that hides the mountains and lakes of Antarctica. They would leave patterns that echo across continents because fragments of their ideas survived the collapse of their world. These possibilities raise strong resistance. The scientific community requires evidence, and so far, no ruins, artifacts, or tools have been found beneath the ice. But this lack of evidence is not evidence of absence. It is a consequence of inaccessibility. The land is unreachable, the ice is too thick, the conditions too harsh. If something ancient lies beneath the surface, we have no means of retrieving it. This is why Antarctica remains a blank in the story of human origins. A blank not because nothing happened there, but because we cannot look. The continent has not been excavated. It has not been mapped. It has not been surveyed below the shallowest layers of snow. It is a region of potential that remains locked beyond all instruments and expeditions. The resistance to acknowledging this possibility does not come only from the limitations of science. It also comes from the weight of the story we have built for ourselves. Our history is structured, linear, understandable, a progression from simple to complex, from primitive to advanced. A forgotten civilization disrupts that story. It introduces uncertainty. It adds complexity. It forces us to accept that we may not be the first to reach a certain level of understanding. And that is a difficult idea for any culture to embrace. Yet the evidence from the natural world reminds us that civilizations rise and fall with the shifting climate. Ice ages come and go. Continents drift. Oceans flood plains that once held cities. Volcanoes erase entire landscapes. The Earth does not preserve the past for our convenience. It buries it. It recycles it. It hides it beneath layers of time that only occasionally reveal themselves. If a civilization existed in Antarctica before the ice, the chances of finding its remains are almost impossibly small, but not zero. And that small possibility is enough to keep the question alive. The Black Pyramids are not proof, but they are a disturbance, a refusal to fit into the narrative, a challenge to the assumption that human history began only when writing appeared. They sit at the edge of our understanding like a whisper from a forgotten world. Before we can address the meaning of this whisper, we must confront a final barrier: the scientific reluctance not to explore the unknown, but to accept the consequences of finding something unexpected. Every scientific field has its boundaries, not the boundaries defined by nature, but the boundaries shaped by funding, reputation, and the unspoken rules that determine which questions are safe to ask. Most scientific discoveries happen at the edge of what is known, but not at the edge of what is acceptable. And Antarctica, with its impossible shapes and buried landscapes, sits exactly at the point where science becomes uncomfortable. The Black Pyramids challenge geology. The subglacial mountains challenge geomorphology. The ancient forests challenge climate models. The subglacial lakes challenge biology. And the idea that anything artificial might lie beneath the ice challenges everything at once. It is not that scientists refuse to look at the evidence. It is that they cannot risk drawing conclusions that stand too far outside the established framework. In research, uncertainty is tolerated. Radical implications are not. The debate surrounding the Black Pyramids reveals this tension clearly. Any researcher who proposes that the structures might be artificial faces immediate criticism, not on the basis of evidence, but on the basis of credibility. The scientific community treats extraordinary claims as hazards. A single controversial statement can damage a career, reduce grant opportunities, and isolate a researcher from colleagues. As a result, speculation is discouraged even when the questions are legitimate. This environment creates a paradox. Scientists are encouraged to explore the unknown, but only if the unknown remains within a predictable range. Antarctica does not fit that range. The continent defies expectations. It holds anomalies that resist classification. And it contains features that could, under different circumstances, inspire bold hypotheses. But instead, they inspire silence. There are radar images that show reflections inconsistent with solid rock. There are magnetic anomalies that cannot be fully explained. There are geometric patterns in the terrain that appear too orderly for random processes. And there are climate transitions in the ice core record so abrupt that they challenge our models of natural variability. Each of these anomalies is studied individually, but together they form a picture that many researchers are unwilling to assemble. This is not a failure of science. It is the cost of its structure. Science advances through careful steps, through repeatable experiments, through conclusions that can withstand scrutiny. But Antarctica does not allow those steps. It does not offer repeatability. It does not allow excavation. It does not permit direct observation. The environment prevents the kind of data collection that science requires to form confident conclusions. And in the absence of confidence, speculation becomes dangerous. So the anomalies are placed into categories that feel safe: unusual geology, rare atmospheric conditions, data noise, instrument calibration errors, natural coincidence. These explanations are not dishonest. They are cautious. They protect researchers from the risk of stepping too far into uncertainty. Yet uncertainty is exactly where the truth often hides. Some scientists privately admit that certain features beneath the ice are difficult to interpret. Some acknowledge that the radar echoes from specific regions resemble hollow structures more than solid terrain. Some confess that the magnetic patterns hint at formations that cannot be easily explained by bedrock composition. But these admissions remain private. They appear only in conversations, in late-night discussions, in the margins of thoughts not written into papers. The hesitation is understandable. Suggesting that something artificial lies beneath Antarctica would not simply be a bold claim. It would be a rewriting of the entire timeline of human civilization. It would imply that history is missing chapters. That knowledge has been lost. That the world has forgotten an era that predates everything we consider ancient. Such an idea is not merely controversial, it is destabilizing. This is why the Black Pyramids are often dismissed before they are examined, not because the shapes are uninteresting, but because the implications are too large. If the structures are artificial, then history must be rebuilt from the ground up. If they are natural, the mystery dissolves. And because the natural explanation is safer, it becomes the default. But safety is not the same as truth. Scientific reluctance also arises from the simple fact that Antarctica is inaccessible. To investigate the Black Pyramids directly, researchers would need to travel across thousands of miles of ice under extreme conditions, using equipment capable of penetrating kilometers of frozen terrain. The cost would be enormous, the risks significant, and the justification difficult to defend. Institutions do not fund expeditions built on speculation. As a result, the mysteries remain untouched. Not because they lack importance, but because they lack feasibility. This leaves the world in a strange position. We have data, but no interpretation. We have anomalies, but no conclusions. We have shapes on satellite images, but no direct examination. And we have a continent that refuses to reveal anything more than fragments. To many scientists, these fragments are insufficient to form a new hypothesis about human civilization. But to those who study patterns, who observe similarities across continents, who recognize the echoes of forgotten stories, the fragments are enough to justify curiosity, enough to justify questions, enough to justify the possibility that something extraordinary lies beneath the ice. Yet curiosity alone cannot overcome institutional caution, and so the evidence remains in a liminal space, not accepted, not denied, not explored, not explained. This tension creates an atmosphere unlike any other scientific mystery. It is not a lack of data, it is a lack of permission. Antarctica does not simply hide secrets, it prevents them from being asked. And behind this reluctance lies a fear far older than academia. The fear of discovering something that forces us to reconsider everything we know. If an ancient structure lies beneath the ice, the implications would be immediate and overwhelming. It would suggest that civilizations rose and fell long before recorded history. It would challenge assumptions about human evolution, migration, and technological development. It would force us to accept that progress is not linear. That knowledge can be lost, that the story of humanity is far longer and far more complex than we believe. This possibility frightens researchers not because it is impossible, but because it is transformative. And so the scientific community stands at a closed door, aware of the handle, aware of the weight behind it, but unwilling to turn it. The Black Pyramids do not need to be proved artificial to serve their purpose. Their purpose is to challenge the comfort of certainty, to remind us that the world is vast, that history is incomplete, that our understanding of the past is limited not by evidence, but by access. Before we consider whether the pyramids could indeed be artificial, we must confront the final and most unsettling question. What if the structures are real and we are simply not ready for what their existence would mean? There is a moment in every great mystery when the questions no longer point outward but inward, when the evidence becomes less important than the meaning behind it, when the debate shifts from what is possible to what we are willing to consider. Antarctica brings us to that moment with an intensity few places on Earth can match. For 12 parts, we have circled the edges of this frozen continent. We have examined impossible mountains, forgotten forests, ancient lakes sealed in darkness, maps that should not exist, and scientific boundaries drawn not by nature but by caution. At every step the same presence has waited, the Black Pyramids, silent, unexplained, defiant. And now the question stands alone at the centre of the story. What if the pyramids are real, not natural formations, not misinterpreted shadows, not coincidences of erosion or ice? What if they are exactly what they appear to be? Structures, built with intent, built with intelligence, built in an age long buried beneath the weight of time and climate. The question does not require belief. It requires imagination. It requires the willingness to consider a possibility that challenges the foundation of our understanding. If the pyramids of Antarctica are real, then every assumption about human history must be reconsidered. Civilization, as we define it, begins around 6,000 years ago. Cities, writing, astronomy, organized religion, and monumental architecture all emerge within that narrow window. Everything before it is labelled prehistoric, primitive, or speculative. Yet the presence of a pyramid beneath Antarctic ice would not belong to that timeline. It would belong to something else entirely, something older, something forgotten. Imagine for a moment a world where Antarctica was not a desert of ice, but a land of green, a world of forests, rivers, and stable climates, a world where life flourished, where the conditions for settlement and construction existed long before our familiar civilizations took shape. The geological evidence for such a world is undeniable. The continent was once warm enough to sustain ecosystems that could rival those of ancient Africa or South America. In that world, could a civilization have risen? Could it have built? Could it have left behind structures that would one day appear as triangles breaking through frozen ground? The idea may seem improbable, but so too once seemed the idea that an entire mountain range lay hidden beneath Antarctica, or that life could survive in lakes sealed off by 3 kilometers of ice, or that a 16th century map might contain coastlines millions of years older than itself. Antarctica has a way of transforming the improbable into the possible. If the pyramids are real, then their survival becomes the next question. How could a structure endure millions of years of climate shifts, freezing temperatures, and crushing pressure? The answer lies in the ice itself. The same force that destroys landscapes on the surface preserves them below. Ice does not simply bury. It protects. It stabilizes. It stops time. A stone structure trapped beneath the ice would not erode. It would not collapse. It would not decay. It would be preserved as perfectly as the microbial life found in subglacial lakes. The ice becomes a vault, holding fragments of worlds that no longer exist. But even if the pyramids are real, who built them? This is the question that unsettles even the boldest imagination. Not because the answer is impossible, but because any answer forces us into territory where history becomes speculation. If a civilization existed in Antarctica, it would not fit into the familiar sequence of human development. It might predate Egypt, Sumer, the Harappan culture, and the ancient civilizations of China and the Americas. It might predate even the ancestors of modern humans. It might belong to a branch of humanity lost to time, or to a precursor species whose story we have not yet uncovered. This idea does not require extraterrestrial intervention or fantastical theories. It requires only the acknowledgement that the Earth has hosted life for billions of years, ecosystems for hundreds of millions, and intelligent hominins for much longer than recorded history suggests. The timeline of human development contains gaps large enough to hide entire chapters. If the pyramids are real, they could be the remnants of one such chapter. A chapter erased not by war or collapse, but by climate. By a shift so immense that the entire continent transformed into a world of ice. Human history is shaped by climate more than we admit. Civilizations rise when the climate is stable and fall when it changes. If Antarctica once hosted life, the sudden arrival of ice would have erased everything. But not perfectly, not completely, not if structures remained. The pyramids, if real, would also change how we understand ancient patterns. Why the same shapes appear across continents. Why alignments to stars are universal. Why myths from different cultures describe ages of catastrophe, floods, darkness, and worlds destroyed by forces beyond human control. Perhaps these stories are not inventions. Perhaps they are memories. Faded echoes of a time when the world looked very different from the one we inhabit now. What if the pyramids are the last surviving witness of that time? This possibility is not something science can explore easily. Not yet. The ice is too thick, the environment too harsh, the continent too vast and hostile for direct investigation. But the shapes remain, the shadows persist, the geometric precision refuses to disappear. And so the mystery endures, waiting for the moment when technology, courage, or necessity finally pushes humanity to look beneath the ice. But beneath the scientific implications lies something more profound. A truth about ourselves. The greatest mysteries of the world do not frighten us because they are strange. They frighten us because they make us aware of how little we know. They remind us that history is not a completed story, but an ongoing discovery. They reveal how easily entire worlds can vanish, leaving behind only fragments for future generations to interpret. The pyramids of Antarctica. Whatever they are, invite us to confront a deeper humility. The humility of not knowing, the humility of possibility, the humility of recognizing that our species is not the first to walk this planet with curiosity or ambition. What if the pyramids are real? What if they stand as the final message from a civilization erased by time? What if they are not anomalies, but warnings, or memories, or monuments to an age that ended long before ours began? We may never know the answer, not until the ice releases its hold, not until technology reaches what nature has concealed, not until curiosity outweighs caution. But the question remains, echoing across a continent of silence. What if the pyramids are real? And what if their existence proves that our entire understanding of history is not only incomplete, but entirely wrong? If this journey left you with questions of your own, feel free to stay with us a little longer. You can like the video, share it with someone who enjoys quiet mysteries, and subscribe if you would like to wander deeper into these forgotten corners of our world. Thank you for being here and for exploring this silence with me.